The polished black motorcade glided past the palace gates, its approach silent yet unmistakable. It came to a halt with military precision near the main visitor entrance of Buckingham Palace. A light morning mist hung in the air, softening the outlines of the historic stonework and amplifying the lush greens of the royal gardens. Tourists and palace staff bustled around, their movements purposeful yet dwarfed by the grandeur of the setting. Flags on the vehicles announced the arrival of a NATO delegation, spearheaded by the United States military. From the lead car emerged Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Monroe of the United States Marine Corps. His uniform, crisp and decorated, reflected a long and distinguished career. Every medal told a story, from Kandahar to Fallujah. Monroe surveyed the grounds with a soldier's eye, his professional stoicism briefly betraying a flicker of impatience. The ceremonial atmosphere, with its red uniforms and silent guards, seemed overdrawn to him. All this fanfare for a strategy meeting, Monroe muttered to Major Lucas Grant, his aide. We could have done this at Norfolk and spared the theatrics. Grant only nodded, his attention pulled to the royal guard standing like a statue nearby. In a brilliant red tunic, bearskin hat, and gleaming boots, the guard was a sight. Sergeant Callum Whitaker stood unflinching, his eyes fixed forward, posture perfect. Monroe scoffed. Without waiting for protocol or permission, Monroe deviated from the group. He walked straight towards Sergeant Whitaker, ignoring the subtle disapproving glances from both British and American staff. He studied the guard up close, hands behind his back. You people sure know how to make an impression, Monroe commented to no one in particular. Though I wonder what kind of tactical use that fur hat has in a real firefight. Lieutenant Colonel Monroe, came a composed voice. Edward Sterling, the palace's liaison, approached with a polite smile and a hint of urgency. Please rejoin the delegation. We have a tightly structured schedule. Monroe gave a noncommittal grunt, but eventually returned to the group. As they moved along the garden path, his eyes kept flicking back toward the guards stationed along the perimeter. After a moment of silence, he turned to Sterling. These men, Monroe asked, gesturing toward the stoic figures, they're just ceremonial, right? For the tourists. Before Sterling could answer, Monroe turned to his colleagues. Back home, we make sure our soldiers earn their pay. Mannequins and redcoats don't win wars. Colonel Arthur Langston, the senior American officer on site, cleared his throat. Garrett, the Royal Guards rotate out from active duty. They've seen combat. This isn't just for show. Monroe raised an eyebrow. So we're putting trained soldiers on parade instead of in the field? That's one way to waste talent. Across the path, Captain Thomas Gray of the Royal Guard had taken notice. He knew Whitaker well, a seasoned soldier with 4 deployments, most recently embedded with American units on a high-risk intelligence retrieval operation. His reputation for discipline was why he'd been chosen to stand post during the NATO visit. As the group approached a historical marker, Sterling launched into an explanation about the architectural evolution of the West Wing. Monroe, disinterested, slowly slipped away again. He made a direct line back to Sergeant Whitaker, this time more determined. Standing within feet of the guard, Monroe began his provocation. I admire your focus, Sergeant, he said mockingly. Though I can't see how standing still helps you when bullets start flying. Tourists nearby started murmuring, a few raising phones. Everyone knew you weren't supposed to approach the guards, let alone talk to them. Monroe leaned in closer. In the Marines, he said, voice louder, we train for adaptability. Situational awareness. A soldier who doesn't respond is a liability. Don't you agree, Sergeant? Whitaker remained silent, his eyes unmoving. Garrett, Grant called from a distance, noticing the interaction. We're moving on. Monroe didn't budge. Just conducting a little cross-cultural military exchange, he called back, sarcasm dripping from each word. He stepped even closer, now inches from Whitaker's face. Ever seen combat, Sergeant? Or do you just polish medals and pose for postcards? Colonel Langston's voice finally cut through the air. Lieutenant Colonel Monroe, return to the group now. Monroe walked away only when physically pulled by Grant, but not before sneering, we'll finish this later, Sergeant. Minutes passed. At the next scheduled event, the changing of the guard ceremony, the delegation gathered at the designated viewing area. Monroe used the crowd's distraction to once again make his move. This time, he walked right into Whitaker's line of sight and raised his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, Monroe proclaimed, gesturing dramatically, observe the British military tradition, rigidity over readiness. This man is trained to stand still, while we train to respond. Murmurs swirled through the audience. Monroe stepped closer again. Tell me, Sergeant, he said with biting emphasis, What's your combat strategy when someone gets this close? Whitaker didn't flinch. An elderly British veteran in the crowd whispered harshly, "You're out of line." But Monroe ignored him, tapping the insignia on his own chest. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Monroe, USMC. 3 combat zones. I'm ordering you now. Salute me. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with precise movement, Whitaker raised his gloved hand, not in salute, but to remove Monroe's fingers from the barrel of his rifle. "Sir," Whitaker said in clipped British tone, "you are in direct violation of standing orders regarding contact with the Queen's Guard. Touching a guard or their equipment constitutes a Category B security breach." Monroe blinked, stunned. Furthermore, Whitaker continued, "Eyes now locked on Monroe's. Palace protocol supersedes NATO operational hierarchy while on royal grounds. Standing Order 157 mandates that guards remain unresponsive to visiting military ranks. My oath is to the Crown, not to foreign officers." His voice never rose, yet it carried over the hushed crowd like a command. "This isn't disrespect, Lieutenant Colonel. This is discipline." As Whitaker resumed his stance with machine-like precision, Captain Gray arrived. Sergeant Whitaker responded within the guidelines, Gray said evenly. "Contact initiated by a foreign officer authorizes limited verbal correction." Monroe tried to respond but found no traction. Gray added, "While we respect NATO protocol, palace grounds fall under royal jurisdiction. This is not your command, sir." Colonel Langston stepped in, visibly frustrated. "Lieutenant Colonel, we're leaving. Now." As the Americans rejoined their group, Monroe walked in silence, fuming. Behind them, Whitaker stood unfazed, his red tunic catching the sun. Later, as they passed the guard post to exit, several officers nodded respectfully toward Whitaker. Monroe remained silent. A general from their delegation finally turned to Monroe. "Discipline isn't always about reaction, Colonel. Sometimes it's about restraint. Sergeant Whitaker met your challenge and ended it without raising his voice or his weapon. That's real control." In the reflection of the motorcade window, Monroe saw his own face, tense, unsettled, and behind him, Whitaker, motionless, unshaken, undefeated. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Tradition isn't weakness, and respect is earned, not demanded. And across the ocean, beneath the crown's shadow, one soldier in red had shown the world what discipline truly looked like. The following week, an internal memo circulated among NATO's higher leadership. It included footage from the palace security team, statements from both American and British officers, and a formal note of apology from the U.S. Embassy in London. The incident had gone viral. Clips posted anonymously to social media racked up millions of views, sparking debate on military etiquette and international respect. Monroe, meanwhile, received a quiet reprimand. Nothing career-ending, but enough to bar him from further diplomatic assignments. In contrast, Sergeant Callum Whitaker's name was now quietly known in circles far beyond palace duty, respected not for what he did, but for what he chose not to do. That's how you honor both country and code.